more concretely, I'm just like, okay, let's work with the body because it's direct. You can talk all day, whether it be in therapy or talking things through with your friend, or talking in your own head with an affirmation. And, maybe that helps. I have a therapist. It's not bad. It's good to talk. However, the embodiment is just so much more direct. It's like, let's say you're saying, I have good boundaries. I have good boundaries. I'm like, okay, but just do these 3 physical changes and then we'd actually get that in your system. We don't have to talk to ourselves into it. It's just do it.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to this episode where we're continuing our conversation with Mark Walsh. Mark is the founder of Embodied Yoga Principles. This is a very unique, I don't want to call it a style of yoga because what's so cool about it is that you can apply it to any style of yoga you're currently doing. It's really a way of looking at the practice that helps you gain awareness of your subconscious patterning. And we talked a lot about it in Tuesday's episode. So I really encourage you to check out Tuesday's episode because you really won't think about your yoga practice the same way afterwards. Today, we're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to pick up where we left off talking about the role of meditation. According to Mark, meditation is fantastic for self-awareness and developing an introspective practice, but he says meditation really falls short in the sense that it doesn't teach us social awareness or interpersonal skills. So he's going to tell us more about that, as well as why the guru model between teacher and student is really broken, and why you might want to practice what he calls inquiry instead of affirmations. I know a lot of people, including myself, love affirmations, but he has an interesting twist to offer on that. So before we dive back into the episode, I just want to remind you to support the show. Keep content like this coming to you for free. The easiest way to show your support is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, and to make a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com. I'm sure you have a birthday, something coming up, someone you need to get something for, or maybe you just want to treat yourself. This week, I'm featuring the beautiful amber stones and jewelry over at SavannahSpirit.com. Amber is therapeutic. It was prescribed by the physicians years and years ago for things like headaches, heart problems, arthritis. It's also known to protect you while you're traveling. Amber really is a powerful healer that gives the wearer a true sense of health and well-being. It's known to balance emotions, clear the mind, release negative energy. Amber also aids in manifestation, eases stress, and it helps clear phobias and fears. It's just a beautiful, warm color, and Savannah Spirit has so many beautiful pieces of amber jewelry, so I just wanted to shout those out. Remember, you can get 30% off anything your heart desires at SavannahSpirit.com with that code podcast30. All right, let's dive back into our conversation with Mark. So Mark, on Tuesday's episode, you brought up something really interesting, which was this idea that meditation gives us self-awareness, but not social awareness. And it doesn't really necessarily help us develop our interpersonal skills. How can we... Well, first of all, I'm curious exactly what the meditation you do looks like. And again, I'm sure that part is the self-awareness piece. But then what are you doing to get this sort of social awareness that you said is just as important? So I guess that's kind of a two-part question. But like, are you doing a mantra meditation in the morning? Are you doing a breath-based meditation?
Yeah, my basic meditation is pretty traditional Theravada. So it's mostly body scanning, breath awareness, and some of the Brahma Viharas on the sort of more emotional positivity front. So like metta meditation and things. So it's pretty standard, pretty, by the book, Theravada stuff. Good base. I would say it's a good base for anyone. I teach all my students body scanning, mindfulness of breathing, and metta bhavana. Good base for anyone. And there are equally good kind of Hindu traditions out there. I'm just not so well trained in them.
And I kind of threw morning out there, but are you a fan of a certain time of day?
I like the morning before I turn my phone on and before I send my email on and things get crazy. On meditation retreats, I like nighttime sits as well. I find lunch pretty challenging. There's a natural rhythm that I find. It's the beginning of the day is good. But then I have the interpersonal practices. So for example, I go to 12-step meetings. I go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I regard that as a kind of interpersonal meditation. I'm being present and listening to others as they share. And I'm sharing authentically myself, from the heart and from my body. And I have partner practices. So I've done Aikido for 22 years, including 3 years full time. So that for me is a practice of sensitivity and listening, and a lot of creativity in my Aikido now. I do a lot of flirting as well, Brett. So I like to flirt any chance I get. I find that a fantastic interpersonal practice of sensitivity and influence. And then I have a chance to be a leader quite often. I lead teams. I lead training teams that are quite big. So again, this is an application really, but we could also think of it as a practice. I dance as well. So I do partner dance work. And sometimes my wife and I kind of sit down and do kind of like little shared mindful communication things together, which are a bit more formal. So yeah, trying to bring that mindful awareness into relationships. And I'll be honest, I find it difficult at times. I find other people challenging. That for me is a big area to grow into.
Something that I think gets popularized these days is this idea of like protecting your own energy a little bit. We're talking a lot about self-awareness. And even as I mentioned before, I train teachers and I teach bodywork techniques, and that's something people always want to know about. They're like, oh, well, how do I protect my energy from, like someone else's energy? And it's sort of this interesting question. And I'm curious what you have to say about that, given what you just explained to us, like the importance of interpersonal skills and kind of not being in our own little bubble in terms of just meditating and getting super self-aware, but not knowing how to properly interact with others.
Yeah, well, I mean, the old cliche that it all comes from self-love is definitely something I'd agree with. And, self-care being a really important part of something that we teach people and work with, and encouraging teachers. I mean, that's a big part of any course that I do, is looking at self-care. We also look at boundaries a lot, though. So we have a no posture, which is kind of, looking at what do you want to say no to? And that could be in yourself, like an addiction, or it could be in others, bad behavior, people crossing your lines.
What's the no posture? Will you tell us? What does it look like? I'm like, I need to practice this one every day.
The no posture is a karate posture with one hand in front. It's kind of a wide stance, kind of as wide as the mat, kind of like a warrior one, but a bit wider, so not aligned. And then the front leg and the front hands are outstretched, and the back hand is in a fist. So it looks, if people go to YouTube and they just put in no pose, they will see a beautiful Ukrainian woman who happens to be my wife, practicing no posture. That's for some reason our most popular video. I think it's mostly her. So if anyone wants to look at no pose, they can go to YouTube and have a look at that and be taught through it. And there's like 20 mistakes that people make that reveal things. It's a really good example of how mistakes aren't mistakes. The open people aren't covered up and the defensive people are defensive. And just so many ways in which people get that wrong in inverted commas, i.e. their personality, their embodiment is expressing itself. So it's a really good example, and it brings up some powerful themes around boundaries and politics and all sorts of themes. So we work with that. The main thing I'd say around people saying, about their energy and things like that is that the problem with that is they're using a really good metaphor or analogy, and they actually need to get down to the nuts and bolts of what's happening. So, for example, like I've worked in Sierra Leone with a load of traumatized soldiers, and I was around pretty difficult, hyper-aroused and numb embodiments all day long in Sierra Leone. And if I think of it in terms of energy, that's a nice metaphor. It's like I could discuss it with you and it would make sense, right? But in order to actually do something with that, I need to actually notice what's happening. And what was happening is my posture was micro-mirroring their posture. I was getting tense in my body as a result of being around their tension. And it's only when you get to the level of the actions of the body that you can actually do something different. I mean, there's other tricks, like changing your clothes or washing your hands or visualizing a piece of glass in front of you, whatever. But where the rubber hits the road is where you actually get to the nuts and bolts of what people mean when they talk about energy. And then you can actually change that. Otherwise, you're just talking in metaphors, which is not helpful.
That's interesting. So you're saying that instead of talking about energy, we should talk about what do you actually feel or see physically happening in your body when you're around someone who, you think has bad energy or something like that. Like for example, maybe your shoulders tense a little bit up towards your ears.
This is the same anything. Like if someone says, I get really stressed in this pose, or I get really stressed at work when I open my email, I'd ask a weird question. I'd say, how do you do that? What do you do in your body when I do that? When for example, we do a game where we throw Kleenex at people, we throw tissues at people, and they have a very mild, safe stress response. So this is something I got from one of my teachers, Paul Linden, who works in abuse recovery. And then people say, oh, I freaked out, or I got tense. And I say, great, where? How? And they go, you know what I did? I stopped breathing and I tensed my belly and I clenched my jaw and butt muscles and my toes kind of grip the ground. I'm like, okay, great. Now don't do that. And then we throw the tissue again, or we do the chair pose again, or the plank pose again, or whatever we're doing that's creating the stress response. So we give people a chance to notice that stress response and then actually to do something different. And this is why I think modern posture yoga is genius. us because it gives us a place to play, a dojo in Japanese, a place of the way. It gives us a place to explore, learn about ourselves and try new options that's consequence-free, that's safe and controlled. Like, you know, I was joking with my students, say yoga is amazing because it doesn't bloody matter. It doesn't matter if you're in tree pose and you fall over. No one dies. You don't lose your job. You don't lose your kids. You know, you can just laugh and you can say, okay, well, look at my pattern. I have a pattern around pride, or I have a pattern around tensing up. I have a pattern around shame because I'm a yoga teacher and I have a story about that. You know, even something like tree pose, there's all these emotional, social, political layers even to it. And it's like, and yoga's fantastic because it just gives us this like opportunity to examine those and then to make other choices.
I think that's such a refreshing thing to hear, as I know yoga gets taken more and more seriously and becomes more and more popular. It's important to just remember that, yes, that's an option, right? You can also just look at it, as you say, as like this playground that's safe and a place where people can explore. I'm curious, so if, for example, my stress response is my shoulders hike up towards my ears. If I am able to stop doing that physically in the body, according to you, does that mean that the stress response is no longer happening or hitting me? Or is it still, do you get my question? Like, if I can just eliminate the physical, if I just eliminate the physical reaction, is that enough?
Yeah. Well, you know, can you be depressed and do star jumps, Brett? Like, can you feel, I know I'm talking about clinical depression. I mean, can you feel sad and do star jumps? And you can try that now. You know, like it's, first of all, I'd say don't believe a word I say. I'm not a believer in the guru tradition. What I would say is next time you have a stress response in yoga or just general life, inhibit it to some extent, and you're not going to be 100% successful at that. There's just too many variables, too many things that change. Like, you know, unless you're super advanced yoga, you're not going to be able to like change your heart rate immediately, for example, your blood flow. But you're going to be able to change a lot of things like your breathing or your tension levels, particularly the levels of expansion and contraction. And then you notice, like, do the experiment. Does it feel different? You know, like right now, anyone listening to this podcast can scrunch up their face, they can scrunch up their belly, they can hold their breath and notice if you got more or less stressed. And then you can relax your belly, relax your tongue, open your posture, have a sense of expanding into the space all around you. Say, and notice if you've got more or less stressed. And I immediately notice I start to smile, Brett. So, you know, for me, the experiment has pretty conclusive results, but I invite people to do that experiment and others like it.
No, I like that. And I think they have proven scientifically, right, that if you force yourself to smile, just using the muscles of your face to smile releases chemicals in the brain that, you know, also make you happy.
Yeah, there's loads. Ekman, for example, did some research on this. There's all kinds of fun ones, like people being forced to hold a pen between their teeth, which kind of makes you smile, and then people have more positive appraisals of people in the room, and they have different levels of affect and feeling. Again, though, I don't want to point to there's all this scientific research and embodiment coming out now, but actually I don't want to point to it because it's just another claim of authority. You know, it's just pointing to more authority, whether it's the guru who, you know, the great guru, or whether it's the, you know, the great scientific paper. I would just point people back to their own experience and doing some experiments on this, actually just noticing, trying things.
Mark, can you speak a little bit to the student-teacher relationship? Because you've said a couple times that, you know, you don't believe in the whole guru thing, which I think is great, and that people really need to learn from their own direct experience. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. At the same time, you know, people are looking for guidance. They're looking for someone to sort of show them the postures that they should be practicing, or, you know, they get attached to a teacher or a style of yoga. What are your thoughts on this? Yeah,
so the guru system has been proven conclusively to always lead to abuse in the West. In every case, it has failed miserably time and time again on ethical level and at other levels too. So I'm saying this in pretty harsh terms because it just isn't. I don't see how this is debatable anymore. You know, every week's another scandal. So that's my starting point. The second one is like, what's actually our Western tradition? What's actually our Western tradition of sort of, you know, is there a tradition of kind of humanistic learning of you know, this Rogerian counseling traditions, for example, of the client-centered? Of course, we still do teachers, right? Like my grandmother was a driving instructor. She would say, press this pedal on the right and the car will go faster. And you could do that experiment and you could learn quicker than if you tried to figure it out for yourself. So I think there's always room for teaching. And I wouldn't take a kind of completely laissez-faire point of view and say, you know, there's no such thing as teaching. And I think we can have hierarchies of competence without having kind of moral hierarchies. And I think those hierarchies of competence can still be up for challenge and there can still be two-way flow. Pete Blackaby, who's a great teacher in the UK, I was just interviewing earlier, actually is a big believer in this, you know. It's got a humanistic take on yoga. And I think there can be dialogue between student and teacher. There can be mutual learning while still not becoming totally postmodern and saying, everything's all good, we can still say, well, things could be better for certain things, and they can be teachers, and experience matters, and experience counts, and qualifications might point to something, while not kind of taking this, like the guru knows better for your body, which is a profoundly disempowering position. I mean, think of the average yoga class. People walk in and they're told what to do. They're told how to sit, stand, and breathe. Now, aside from the fact that's kind of kinky and weird, that has implications to the person and to the politics, that it's a training, if we're not careful, in conformity. And for some people like me who are wild and undisciplined, that's actually sometimes a good thing. However, generally, it's not what people need. That they need to be given choices and be able to actually choose for themselves. Like every time one of my students chooses to take a rest, they're actually learning agency. They're learning the ability, like, hey, my body is my boundaries. Like, I don't adjust my students without asking them, because their bodies are their boundaries. Like, I want them to be secure in that, and I want them to be reinforced that when I say, hey, can I adjust you, and they say no, and I leave that, I say, okay, cool, then they go, wow, this is an empowering feeling. So these things about like having choices and whether we adjust students without consent, these things are actually really big deals, because of the implicit psychological and political teaching that's happening in that class. And I think this is just blind to the vast majority of movement practitioners, not just yoga teachers. Martial arts teachers are worse, for example, in many ways.
Yeah, this is a lot. I mean, I agree with you that people come into a yoga class and they're told what to do. And I love to encourage people to move intuitively in my yoga classes. And when I do trainings, I encourage people I'm training to invite this in as well. The issue that I think a lot of us come up against is that people don't know how to move intuitively. And unless you tell them what to do, they have no idea what to do. It's almost like they're that disconnected from their bodies and that disconnected from their own agency. Do you experience this as well?
Well, I'm mostly working with more experienced people, but I work in business, for example. I work with complete beginners who don't have any sense of their own embodiment, and you need to go at that fairly gently and give options, but still giving people choices. But more guidance is appropriate when people have lower levels of experience, and we play with that. Like an EYP, we'll play with that. We'll say, okay, do exactly as you're told, as long as it's not dangerous, for 5 minutes, and then the next 5 minutes be a rebel. Just do what the hell you want. Like, notice which is familiar, because some people have that pattern of rebelling habitually to everything. That's my kind of Irish rebel pattern, and that's just not helpful sometimes for me. So we actually play with that, and we bring it out for how is it to lead, and we'll get someone else to lead a class and be like, how is it for you to lead? How is it for you to lead even though you don't really know what you're doing? And we'll step in if there's anything serious, dangerous happens. Yeah, like bringing these things that it's all, what's the word, just for the mill. It's all like stuff that you can be brought into awareness. That whole process of the class, and whether you're the joker in the class or whether you're the naughty one or the good student, like all these social, psychological, embodied roles that go on in the class. This is all stuff that can be brought out. And if this all sounds like, oh my God, it's group therapy, mostly we bring this out through laughter and fun. Like we have yoga competitions where people are having tree-offs and plank-offs, and we play selfie games, and it's just a lot, like, this is, I think, a very kind of Anglo-Irish kind of thing. We're using a lot of humor and a lot of fun, a lot of jokes throughout this. So the patterns get exposed, but it's also a good time too.
And what would a plank-off competition be for? It would be to sort of notice how you are in competition with someone else, like what feelings come up and that kind of thing.
You want to bring it on, Brett? You want to plank off right now, me and you?
Yeah.
Oh, tree off. We could do a tree off. So basically that's bringing out people's relationship to competition, to relationship to pushing themselves. For example, like a lot of the business people I work with, they push themselves too hard or they compete too much. But a lot of the more alternative people I work with, they could do with finding that yang side. Sometimes they're a little wet, and it's nice for them to find that competitive side. And they often pretend they're not going to enjoy it and then really do. And it's always kind of controversial, but it is in the sense, yoga in the sense that it's an awareness building practice. It's an integrative practice. It's also a bit of fun to get people back into the state for going out into the street. It's one of the things we do sort of towards the end of a workshop. I don't like to leave people in sort of deep depth shavasana and then say, right, enjoy your life, kick them out the door. So it's also kind of getting people back into the state they might experience in the world.
As we wrap up with our time with you, I'd love it can you share with the listeners just like a couple key postures that are good for different kinds of common patterns? So I think we've talked about some of them already, but I think it would be really fun for people if they want to practice this a little bit at home, give them some ideas. So for example, we talked about Warrior 2 Tuesday and today as like you could hold Warrior 2 if you were trying to channel or cultivate that warrior energy within your life. Maybe that like action taker energy if you notice that's something you need more of. Maybe if you're someone who gives a lot and you want to say no to more things in your life, like me right now, you want to say no more, you'd take that no pose that you described for us, which again, you painted a beautiful visual and people can look up that video on YouTube. And just by holding no pose, I mean, what, 5 or 10 breaths every morning, or
yeah, 1 minute a day with really strong intention and really feeling the emotional felt sense of it, and then using throughout the day some sort of micro poses and little applications of it. So, almost like a prescription, though it's not medical, would be like sort of 5 poses, 5 minutes a day in the morning, 1, 2 that you really like, and 3 that you find challenging. That would be a pretty normal thing someone might come away from a workshop with as a little practice. And you could either practice the pose itself, or you could practice that within your practice. So let's take no. Every time you do a chaturanga, you do a pushing away movement. Like, that's a great no pose right there, a chaturanga. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So it's like instead of just having one pose be the no pose, you can kind of focus on the no energy of multiple poses.
Exactly. Like noticing that stubbornness or that barrier or that border or that loving no, you can even refine it. Most people don't say no because they don't know how to do a loving yet strong no. So there might be a bit of work that needs to be done to make that distinction of what a loving but strong no is, as opposed to a wimpy no or an abusive no.
You mentioned micro poses. Can you explain what that means? Like, how would I do a micro pose throughout the day? Is that something I can do while I'm texting, or
say it's like, hey Brett, can I borrow $100? And you want to say no. You can actually just firm up your posture right now. So extend slightly, go into a very, not a back bend, but very slight extension, and just put one hand forward, like it's like blocking. So like half a chaturanga.
Got it. Or like half the no
Stop
pose.
smiling, put your head on straight, and then just say no, Mark, you can't borrow $100.
Got it. So it's just doing a small aspect of the pose.
Like a body language that won't seem weird. Like, micro postures are micro enough that you can do them in a normal context, not in Berkeley or Brighton, and people will not think you're strange. They just looks like normal body language. It's just like, okay, there's an assertive woman, So you asked before about different postures. No posture, we have a generosity posture, forgiving, receiving posture. We do whole workshops on money involving those two, and a third posture. We use mountain pose as like, what do you stand for? We have, if you imagine mountain pose with the hands raised up to the sky. We have a pose called enthusiasm, which is sometimes called yeah, I hope you don't mind me swearing, which is a super popular one on workshops. It's a super lot of fun. People can see that online. That's a lot of fun. If you put in enthusiasm pose or yeah pose, you'll come up with that one for when you need a bit more enthusiasm. We have a yes pose, which is with the hands out to the side, which is good for listening and empathy. We use child's pose around letting go and grief and forgiveness, of course. Hanging forwards bend. I'm just trying to think of like standard yoga poses we use. But there's loads more postures on. There's 26 main EYP poses. We have a joker posture. We have a sensuality posture for people that need to get into that side of life. We have an authority posture. There's so many.
It is. It's funny. I'm almost like visualizing these postures, and it's cool that you say you actually have refined it to, what did you say, 26?
Yes, we have a basic alphabet of 26, and many of them have variations. Like no, we have different kinds of variations for that. A heart-centered no, and a no where you leave someone behind rather than, that's the ex-boyfriend no. We call that one the no where you leave someone behind rather than the no where you engage. So there's variations on all of them. And occasionally one of the senior teachers will invent one. And, I invented a bunch, and then I realized I'd made a set that was sort of lopsided based on my personality. So I gathered together a bunch of senior yoga teachers and worked with them for a few years to kind of fill in the gaps and find the ones we were kind of missing. And these days it gives a set that's pretty, they're used by life coaches. I work with life coaches a lot. Some therapists, they can be used in other contexts pretty widely because that set gives people enough to play with. What I would say is people do need to be trained in them because of the kind of emotionally triggering sense of a lot of them. Like it can be pretty full on when you're working with no posture. It can bring up a lot of serious stuff up. So it's not ones you really just want to start teaching from one of these YouTube videos from the internet, but for your own practice, play with it, give it a go,
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like I'm visualizing these 26 postures as almost like medication, and you can like create your own cocktail of kind of what you want to be playing with.
I like that, Brett. I might steal that. The cocktail.
Yeah, to balance your patterns, it's like taking the correct vitamins or something like that.
Yeah, maybe more like vitamins and less like medication because it's less like pathology looking at it. It's more like growth and building range and choice is the key thing there. But it can totally be individualized and personalized and kind of what people really need. Because because we all need something different, right? And it's like, I just, for listeners out there, I'd say, what is the embodiment your yoga is currently building? And is that the one you want? And if not, then maybe make either some adaptations, like doing it slightly differently, or some radical changes.
I love that, because I think, another term that's tossed around all the time is this idea of setting an intention when you come to the mat. And I think I actually recorded a whole podcast on my personal podcast about like, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? Like, I used to really get almost bummed out when teachers would say that, because I just wouldn't even know what to do or what they meant. And
what do I do with that? What do you, like, a lot of like new agey language, I'm like, well, that sounds nice, but what the hell do you even mean? Like, I'm just pretty pragmatic. I'm used to working with pragmatic people. And, intention's great. It's a great start. And then it's like, okay, how do you operationalize that? How do you put that like into concrete stuff?
Well, can you phrase, I'm taking notes because I've been so enjoying talking to you, but what you were saying was what is my yoga practice helping me embody, as like a question that we could ask instead. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, like what is the embodiment I'm building? What is the way, if embodiment's too fluffy, what is the way of being I'm building? What is the how of living that I'm practicing? And do I want to practice another one? And you don't have to take up EYP for that. You can just look at how you're doing your posture. We play with this in all kinds of ways. Like my yoga friend and student from Russia, Katerina, like she's like a real Iyengar head, right? And I just move her mat slightly off angle every time she's in the workshop. And that's what she has to work with for 4 hours. That drives her nuts that her mat isn't aligned properly. And, that's just like a tiny thing. I just nudge it with my toe when I'm walking by when she's not looking. And like we could look at, are you on time for your yoga class? We can look at, how do you walk to your yoga class? Are you kind to the receptionist? There's a whole bunch of stuff. And then there's the poses and the practice themselves, and it's madness to do a loving kindness meditation with aggression. Yeah. Or it's just madness. It's like, okay, what is the way of being I'm building through this?
Yeah, well, it seems like people could really personalize their practice in a deeper way by saying, oh, I've noticed a pattern, either, perhaps through doing this work, and then I want to work with, balancing that pattern through the way I approach every single yoga pose in my practice. And I'm using my yoga practice as, training wheels for standing up in this power and saying no more often, right? And I'm bringing that into the whole physical asana portion. Am I like on the right track here?
Brett, you've been really just a pleasure on this interview, because you really got the idea really quickly. I think sort of 10-20% of yoga teachers, they already know this. They get this already. I've just refined, my brain is like systematizing. So I've made a system that can just do it A, more efficiently, and B, save people a lot of time.
No, I love it. I definitely would love to take one of your workshops and to learn more. I want to make sure we tell people where they can find you, but I have one last question that I'm not going to let you go without asking. And that is just because I think it's going to be really fun to hear your opinion, because especially we've talked about some of this new age language and, what do some of these things really mean? So what is your take on affirmations? Because I know you said when you're like in the pose and you're embodying it, like say no posture, is it good to sort of maybe have an affirmation that goes with that, where you're saying, I am strong in my, like something, I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts on the whole affirmation movement or what people are supposed to be thinking when they're holding the no pose for a full minute or something like that.
Well, I'm more asking them to feel rather than to go into their heads. I'd rather they be connected to the body sensation and the intuition that was arising rather than kind of chatting to themselves in their head. I'm not an expert on this. I would say, though, there's something weird and insecure about someone saying, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this. So, Brett, I really am this. I really am this, And there's something in that which I don't think is convincing to the brain. It's like, okay, if you're so that, why are you telling me? So I have some doubts about it. And I'd say it's the best case scenario, it might not hurt if someone out there's a really big fan of affirmation. More concretely, I'm just like, okay, let's work with the body, because it's direct. You can talk all day, whether it be in therapy or talking things through with your friend, or talking in your own head with an affirmation. And, maybe that helps. I have a therapist. It's not bad. It's good to talk. However, the embodiment is just so much more direct. It's like, let's say you're saying, I have good boundaries. I have good boundaries. I'm like, okay, but just do these 3 physical changes and then we'd actually get that in your system. We don't have to talk to ourselves into it. It's just do it.
So, but Mark, what do you tell people though when they're like, well, my mind is racing, I kind of have the monkey mind thing going on and I can't, either they're struggling with feeling into their body or their mind's going like a mile a minute do you know what I mean? Like in that sense, I feel like sometimes the affirmations or a mantra or whatever for people is like a crutch. But I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I get what you're saying. The postures are so archetypally powerful that they're nearly always interesting, whether that's pleasurable or not. So it's rarely a problem that people's minds drifts in these postures because they're really, something is coming out there. And the inquiry process gives them something to hang their mind on. So they can have that inquiry question, like, where do I need this in my life? Or how does it show up in my life? So that can give their mind something to hand things on.
Yeah, I like that. Using an inquiry question. That would definitely, if someone was having trouble staying focused, that at least it's like the monkey mind's going, but at least it's going in a direction we want it to, inquiring around, the topic at hand. Mark, how can people find and connect with you? It's been such a pleasure having you on the show, and I want to make sure people know where they can access more of your work.
Sure. EmbodiedYogaPrinciples.com. Embodied Yoga, if you put that into Google, it'll probably come up. And on that website is listings of teacher trainings, which currently are in Russia, Sweden, Dubai, where else? We might have one in Bali at some point, in the UK, of course. So the teachers are spread all over Europe. There is one teacher about to be qualified in Austin, Texas. And there's another teacher, Jamie, who's American and comes to the Midwest. We are looking, our next teacher training in the UK is in October. It's 4 days, and you have to already be pretty experienced teacher with some psychological background to be trained in it. And we are looking for the first kind of Americans to come. If there are people from the West Coast to the East Coast that want to be the first teachers in this system from the US, so there's already one in Austin and one teachers in the Midwest. So yeah, they're the main ones. YouTube is fantastic just because a lot of this stuff, I've just got loads of free YouTube content. So if you look at Yoga for Your Whole Life, that's on YouTube. We have other social media, Instagram, Walsh, and there's ebooks that people can look at if they want to explore these ideas and really look at the ebooks and kind of study it that way. But I'd say the free YouTube videos are a good place to start. And if anyone's inspired by it, I don't travel so much, just my schedule's pretty full, but there's other senior teachers that do, or they can, come play with us in the UK.
Wonderful. Well, I'll put all those links down below. And I know you also mentioned circling a couple times in this podcast, and I just wanted to remind all the listeners that I actually did interview Guy, one of the founders and creators of Circling. So I'll also put in the show notes which episode that is, because it ties really nicely into a lot of the work that Mark talked about here. And Guy's episode is actually one of my favorites. It's a little slow at the beginning because it's so hard to describe what circling is, on a podcast. But once he really paints a clear picture, I had so many personal insights after talking to him and just learning more about it. So I'd really encourage listeners to check out that episode that aired a couple weeks ago as well in context of this conversation with Mark.
If people are trainers and coaches, like facilitators, there's a whole nother website, which is embodiedfacilitator.com. So EFC, the Embodied Facilitator course, that's aimed more at people who are like trainers and coaches and facilitators rather than yoga teachers. And it's a lot of the similar stuff, but applied kind of in a business suit to people that work standing up rather than doing downward dog. So, very similar stuff, but in a very different context. So I want to put EFC, the Embodied Facilitator course, out there as well.
Oh, perfect. All right. I will link that up as well. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. Listeners, let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Are you going to try some of these embodied yoga principles in your own practice? Please let me know in our private Facebook group. That URL is savannahspirit.com/group. That will enable me to approve you as a member. And remember, your ratings and reviews here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, really make a difference. So if you don't know how to leave a review, just go to savannahspirit.com/review. There's step-by-step instructions because it is a complicated process on iTunes. I struggle with it myself, but it really makes a difference and gets the show in front of more people looking to transform their life through yoga and meditation. I'm sending you so much love and wishing you a beautiful week ahead. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.